Okay, so next speaker. So we are going to start the next speaker. So we are having Professor Jia Gao from Rutgers University, and she was previously in Stony Brook University. So probably, yeah. And she's going to talk about graph Ritchie flow and its relationship to the network analysis and probably GNNs. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks for including me. We have been doing this for a while, but I want to summarize and show, the geometry of graph problems and applications we have used. So to start, we are always fascinated by real world data with this complex network with many, many interesting properties. This goes from internet graph to brain network, social network, transportation. And many of these graphs we see in reality have interesting properties, novel phenomena, power law degree, community structures. So we want to study this graph structures and interesting problems include, for example, how to understand a single network. So on a graph, there are interesting structures such as clusters we call communities, or in graph learning, we have labels on vertices. We want to propagate these labels from a given data set to the unknown vertices. And we are also interested in understanding a family of graphs. So if I gave you two networks, can you align them, compare them, find responses, or understand in terms of generative models to capture a family of graphs? So we work with the following hypothesis that in general, if you have a graph, you may think about these vertices to be staying in a high dimensional latent space. In addition, these vertices, although super high dimension, they may actually stay in a much lower dimensional manifold. And if we look at the graph, we can understand the graph to be capturing proximity information of this unknown underlying manifold. So working on this hypothesis, we propose to use geometric tools to study these graphs. In particular, I want to share, what we did with linear Ritchie curvature and also curvature flow for capturing interesting properties of these complex networks. So let me start with curvature in classical geometry. Basically, we consider continuous surfaces, and we can define curvature for a point that basically measures how curved the space is at that point, how far away the surface is from something flat. So you can see this, there are different types of surfaces, and we use this analog from this classical notion of sectional curvature in geometry that basically look at, for example, if I have a point x and have a tangent vector xy, and now if we look at the other tangent vectors, from x and translated y, we want to look at if these parallel vectors are going to travel roughly in parallel or start to converge or start to diverge. So the differences is captured in this notion of sectional curvature. And the question is, can we extend this to a discrete setting? For example, if we have a graph, then can we define curvature using a similar idea? So this is the definition of linear Ritchie curvature, which is extending this notion to a graph setting. So now let's think of x, y, and then consider the distance from x neighbors to y neighbors. And we want to calculate the average distance of traveling from x neighborhood to y neighborhood. And we want to compare this with the distance from x to y to see if it's larger or smaller or stay the same. Now, different from the continuous setting. In the continuous setting, we have a nice correspondence of these tangent curvatures, but here we don't. So how to compute average distance? Basically, one idea is to use optimal transport. So to give the formal definition, here is the formula. So we have a metric space. We have two probability distributions defined on X and Y. And we look at the optimal transport distance of moving from the probability measure around X to the probability measure around Y. And this is the optimal transport distance, also called water span distance, W1. And we divide by the distance from X to Y and use 1 minus this ratio to be the curvature of this edge X and Y. Okay, let me give you some pictures to understand this better. So let's start with a simple setting of a grid, two-dimensional grid. Now I have X and Y, they are neighbors on grid. And then if I look at X neighborhood, it will be the 4 vertices around X. Y's neighborhood will be again 4 vertices around Y. Now, if I consider this constant measure translated from X to Y, I can just basically move everything into 1, like shifted, and that will be the optimal transport distance. So if I put it in the previous formula, I have 1 minus what's the distance, which is 1 divided by 1, so this is curvature 0. Sense? Okay, so that is perfect because it matches with our intuition that if I have a infinite two-dimensional grid, it's flat everywhere, so I should have curvature 0 everywhere. Now, moving on, if I have a tree, we can actually write it down exactly what is the curvature. So the curvature for, in general, a edge xy is actually in the square, where dx and dy would be the degree. And in fact, apart from the edges at the very end, for all of the other edges of a tree, you have negative curvature. Again, this matches with the intuition that if you have a tree, is curvature negative, basically everywhere. Okay. For complete graph, this is a highly clustered graph, very dense. Curvature is positive everywhere. Okay. All right. So now let's look at some real-world graph. So this is the picture of the internet autonomous system network. So we basically calculate curvature for all of the edges. And then coloring the edges to be the red edges have negative curvature, the blue edges have positive curvature, the green edges have curvature roughly 0. So as you can see that basically there will be like local networks that are positively curved, and these are connected to each other through negatively curved edges. And these negatively curved edges are mostly the backbone edges. So the data set comes with labels like which are backbone, which are not. And when you compare these, we see backbone edges are almost always negatively curved. Again, matches with a lot of other understanding of the internet topology that is like tree-like, hierarchical structure. So that matches very nicely. So, okay, now we have curvature defined edges. I want to move on to this notion of curvature flow or Ricci flow. So Ricci flow was initially introduced for the continuous setting by Hamilton. And the studies, if you have the surface, you have curvature on every point. Now let's have a dynamic procedure. So basically the metric is modified by the curvature with the objective of smoothing out the curvature everywhere. And so we could do the same thing for a discrete setting of bounding this Ricci flow on the graph. And basically for continuous setting, I said that this procedure is going to shrink areas with positive curvature and enlarge areas with negative curvature. Until to a point, there is a critical point, the singularity, where you basically kind of break it apart. And basically the same thing happens for the discrete setting. So let me show you the formula. So again, once we have the curvature defined for all the edges, we can start to modify the edge weight of the graph. So the way we do it is to say the original edge weight, subtract epsilon, it's just a step function, step size, times the curvature and the current edge weight. And this whole thing is normalized so that we make sure, the collection of edges has the total size or weight be fixed. So once we do this, we're going to basically start to stretch the negatively curved edges and start to compress the positively curved edges. And then what happens is the cluster of community vertices are going to be basically put together, like, brought closer, while the edges connecting communities are going to be stretched. So in particular, actually, experimental different kinds of distributions that we use to define curvature. We could go with the classical definition that is proposed in the original paper, which is uniform distribution on all the neighbors, or another distribution that basically favors vertices that are of smaller distance to x and y. So the second one actually speeds up this procedure towards convergence. So, okay, before I show you all the experiments and data, I want to say a few words about what is known of this type of Ricci flow theoretically. So, like, there are questions, these are fundamental questions that ask, does the Ricci flow converge? And does it generate a unique solution? So people ask this question for different settings. For the classical medical setting, so answers to this question are connected to the proof of the Poincare conjecture. And for discrete setting, a different curvature, discrete Gaussian curvature, again, these questions are answered, it converges, and the solution is unique. And for the graph setting, it's still largely unknown. So lots of questions are still open. So we know, like, for a very special case, we are able to analyze the behavior of Ricci flow. We can basically show this phenomena of communities, moving away from each other, but only for a very special case. Now, for the continuous dynamics, there was a convergence result, but with the assumption that the edge connecting like two vertices in B is always the shortest path. Like once we start to change the weight, this is no longer true, right? You don't know where the shortest path really is. But with the assumption that suppose this is true, this paper shows convergence of Ricci flow in this continuous setting. But these are the only known results of this problem, and we don't know, there's still generally the question is open. All right, I want to move on to say a few words of how we can use these curvature results. So I want to talk about three applications: community detection, network alignment, and graph neural network. So this is karate club. Everyone knows about karate club. So this is a graph with two communities labeled. So we start with the curvature calculated on the edges, and we start to run Ricci flow, right? So basically, after we run Ricci flow, we realize that if we look at the edge weight, there are very clear three clusters. Basically, there are edges with very high weight, much higher than the others. And then what we could do is cut these edges that are really, really long. And after that, we actually have two communities. In this case, there's another group of edges that are also relatively longer than the others. We could cut it again. and this will partition one of the communities further into smaller communities. So this is what happens when you run each flow on a graph, and you get this very clear structure of communities being stretched away, and you can easily cut them to get the community structure. Okay, run it on a larger network. This is, again, real-world data set of Facebook Eagle network. So this would be like the 700 friends of somebody, okay? And these friends are labeled as belonging to different friend circle. And again, well, we should flow and we partition them into like smaller communities. The colors represent if they belong to the same friend circle. We can see that there are certain cases where maybe it's a mix, but in general, we do partition this friend circle into like meaningful groups that match the ground truth label. This is brain network. Again, we saw brain network. So again, this is fMR data with the resting state brain network. The edges represent part of neurons that have high correlation. So again, we run this, we get different groups of neurons connected to each other, and we could do again multi-resolution thing to get different type of communities. So, like on the side, we could also run basically modularity test, just to see if we're cutting the graph to get communities with large modularity. Modularity means we're more likely to be connected to vertices in the same community as opposed to vertices in different communities. So indeed, at the places that we place the cut, it actually corresponds very nicely to generating, highest modularity after we remove these edges. Okay. Comparison with many other community detection methods. So this is such a classical problem. So no wonder a lot of work already on community detection. Basically, what we see is that our method has a sharp transition, meaning I would like to have good community detection result when there is community structure. But when the graph doesn't have community structure, I would want to say, no, there's actually no community, or maybe the whole thing is a single community. So this sharp transition is indeed captured by our method. That's like a phase transition. Okay, questions so far? All right, moving on, I want to continue with two other applications that we worked on. One is network alignment. So basically, we have two graphs, and we want to compare these two graphs. And one of the idea we use is to get some distance measurement, meaningful distance of vertices in the graph, and I want to use that for network alignment. So let me first talk about what is a proper distance measure I could use for two vertices on the network. Okay. So there are many possible distances one can design for vertices on the graph. And typically, if you have the application often gives you some very meaningful distance measure. So if I'm talking about the internet, I could measure the latency between two vertices. This is a very meaningful measure, but of course, this is costly. You may not always have it. On the other hand, if I have a social network, I could possibly measure high stress. Again, this is something with physical meaning, but may not be easy to get. On the other hand, if I have just a graph, one simple thing to use is just to count the number of hops. Okay, so this is easy to get, but there's another trouble with it. All of the networks we handle have small word property. So if I use just hop count, I'm going to get a number, which is an integer between 0 to 6. So it's not very, very useful when I want to use this to, distinguish if it's far or close by. Okay. So what we propose is to, one more thing. Yeah, about to mention is one could also do all kinds of embedding, right? Once you have an embedding, you have a distance coming from the distance in the embedded space. Okay. And over here, like for example, we could do spectral embedding, could do this spring embedding, but we sometimes need to worry about sensitivity issue, that is, if you have, edge insertion or deletion, how much does it change your embedding or change your distance? So what we want to propose is to say, let's use Ricci flow for that. So before I show Ricci flow result, I just want to say a few more words about this robustness issue. So here I'm showing this is quadratic club network, and I'm showing this is spectral embedding, and this is the top embedding or spring embedding, which is you fix some vertices, and you imagine the edges with these springs, and just let it go, right? So the entire network will stabilize, and therefore you have like edge lengths coming from the embedding, and you could use that to measure distance between two vertices in the graph. Okay. So what happens on the picture is I'm measuring distance from everybody to a fixed node. And I'm also taking like a few edges in the graph. I want to look at the distance before and after the change. Okay. Actually, I'm going to color the vertices like basically pink means, the darker the color, the higher the change. Okay. So as you can see, in both cases, vertices to be somewhat pink, like some changes. Now, I want to show two more pictures. The left side is actually just using top count. And the right side is by using the distance measure we get from Ricci flow. So as you can see, compared to what we had before, where everything is almost pink, but here you get the colors to be like a lot lighter, right? No surprising if I look at hop count, just because there are many, shortest paths between a pair. So if you delete a couple of edges, you still have other shortest paths that give you the same count. So hop count is super robust, in fact, for network dynamics. And that's, validated from this picture. And what we have is also quite robust. So the changes before and after I remove the edges, the distance is still somewhat similar. So this is useful because whenever we use applications, we want our distances or measures to be robust to small changes in the graph. And this nice property can be useful for this application graph isomorphism or alignment. So when I talk about two graphs, one question I ask is, can we find correspondence? This is a classical problem of graph isomorphism. So if you look at this two graphs right here, these, although they look very different, but they are exactly the same graph. So if you take the vertices of the same color to the very top, they have the same topology. So can we, compare two graphs to basically find the correspondence? This is a very hard problem. Okay, so it's not known whether it's pretty hard, and like again, we don't have polynomial algorithm. There's some improvement, but still like very, very open. What we want to do is again take a geometric approach and try to find coordinates for vertices. By using these coordinates, we can try to match the two graphs. So for example, if we have two setting points in the plane, how do we align these two setting points? So one idea is I can imagine that, let's say I'm taking landmarks, I'm taking 3 landmarks, and every vertex I measure distance to the 3 landmarks. This is basically a very centric coordinate in 2-dimensional setting. Now, if I manage to align the landmarks of these 2 sets of points, then I can match the other points just by the barycentric coordinate. If they have the same coordinate, they are the same point, and so on and so forth. Okay. So basically, there's a representation of these landmarks, and if the barycentric coordinate match similar, then we say they are likely the same. So we basically try that, but on a graph. And the distance we use, again, we want to use a robust distance, and also a distance that gave us lots of information. So we're using, the distance we get from each flow. We also compare with some other distance measures. And then we try out 2 different experiments. One is we just take a random vector graph and randomly remove a node. And then we see whether we can align the 2 graphs before and after I remove one node. And another picture, I take a protein network and randomly remove 10 edges to see if we can find the correspondence. Basically, I'm using a very small number of landmarks. So here it's only like 2, 3, 4 landmarks that you can easily pick in these networks, because often you have high degree vertices that will be naturally the landmarks, the choice of landmarks you want to use. And the robustness of the metric bring us benefits because we have much higher accuracy compared to alternative distance measures. Okay. All right, questions? Yeah.
So you mentioned that you're using the spectral embedding for the string event. If we use effective resistance embedding, is this going to be more robust to these?
Good question. We haven't tested that. Yeah, we haven't tested that, so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know where it is. Yeah, the spectral and spring are those. Spring is actually not that bad. Spectral is very down below. Yeah. So outcome, although it's super robust, but just because it's not very distributed, so again, it doesn't give us a lot of information. Okay. All right, I want to, in the last part, talk about, again, this robustness property and for applications in graph neural networks. So basically, we look at graph neural networks for node classification. And then we ask the question of how robust is this model. That is, if you think about an adversary that try to insert or delete edges in the input graph, how much can we tolerate that kind of adversarial input information? So basically, in this setup, you have the topology, you have some features, you want to learn a model that predict features for the other unknown labels. And we take the approach that goes back to this hypothesis that although we work on one single particular topology, but imagine these are actually vertices that stay in some underlying latent space and manifold over there. So this graph is actually a one single concrete realization of the proximity information over there. So if we're trying to do some learning on the graph, we really care about this underlying manifold. And we want to get some knowledge about this proximity information in the underlying manifold. So that's the motivation that we introduce this rigid flow metric, which is I start with the graph, I try to do rigid flow, I learn about proximity information. Now I define basically a new distance measure between the vertices. And now in the learning, I'm going to sample from this underlying distance metric, and I want to sample different independently for different episodes of the training part. so that I will not be depending on this particular input, but I allow myself to try to discover this underlying proximity information in the latent space. So that is basically what we try here. So I want to just show a couple of pictures. This is a stochastic block model. So the diagonal means there are 5 communities. And then there will be still some edges connecting some pairs of communities, but there are no edges for like some other pairs. Now these red dots are actually adversarial input. So somebody tried to mess you up. So they just randomly place some edges in the graph. So this is the reaching flow metric we learned from this graph with these adversarial edges. And then here is resampling from this metric. So you still have like lots of these dots from this adversarial input. And over here is actually an intersection of 2 different sampling from the same metric. And we are able to remove quite a lot of this adversarial edges and the influence of that in the topology. So again, the rest of the world needs some numbers to see, okay, how much we can tolerate the adversarial changes to the graph. And basically, we want higher numbers. So that's all what this figure is saying. Same thing, kind of depending on different type of graphs. So, this graph may have different sparsity or density. So the performance varies a little bit. Okay. So I want to pause here. So basically, to conclude, there are very nice geometric notions for continuous setting, and there are ways of adapting that to the discrete graph setting that basically bring geometry into the picture. And here is about some distance measures, like curvature. And actually, we could look at embedding. This is the earlier talk that talked about embedding not necessarily in Euclidean space, but in hyperbolic space or maybe some other kind of hybrid space. Another direction that we are very interested in is to answer questions about network evolution, because this network changes over time, right? You understand the graph now, we want to understand what will be the prediction of the graph of the future. And in particular, we understand how this network evolves over time and more applications down the road. So for the last, I want to say is, joint work with many wonderful colleagues and students. So we started this like 10 years ago, time-wise, but like try to do different things. And if you want to read one paper, I recommend this one. This is probably the most thorough one. And we also have the code available on GitHub. Okay, last time I checked, it was downloaded something like 30,000 times. So I was amazed, like, wow. So we're happy that we're making contribution to the community. So please, if you want to play with it, this is a carefully written code that you can use right away. And questions or comments? That's it. Yeah.
Question. So, I think kind of you talk about like the curvature for different kinds of. I mean, like for the tree like structure, you have the negative waves from different edges. I mean, there's like the relationship between the vision flow and the input maximization, like social network analysis. That probably we can do some interesting things, like we can decompose it, like those longest, shortest path and do
Right. Yeah, so it's a great question. So the question is about whether we can discover this for input maximization. It's a great question. I think personally, there are opportunities, as I can imagine that you want to get your vertices to be around edges of negative curvature that you can reach different communities, right? While embedding it inside a cluster is not a good idea. I don't think anyone has done it. It's a great idea. Maybe it's a great paper. You know, yeah, down the road. Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, that's a similar topic. So we talked a lot about this rich curvature and how it relates to community structures. We also know a lot of classical results about these things like mathematical parts, modularity, trigger concept, things like this. Do you have some? Would you recommend us to read some of the classical results that tell us the correlation between, or you think you just briefly?
Yeah. So again, a wonderful question that is how does this relate to like classical notion of class or community? Actually, it's one of the major open questions as I see. That if we really want to say something like if my graph has community structure using some of the classical notions, I want to say this, you know, rich curvature or flow can be tested. So we're able to say this for a very special type of graph, which is a complete graph, where I put another complete graph on each of the vertices. For that technique, we can write down, you know, what the region flow converges to, we can write it down, we indeed partition this. But I think, you know, that is like very special. So it's open. So if something can be done in this direction, that would be great.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.